This is the Up Your Dialogue podcast.
All right. The Up Your Dialogue podcast is up and running. I don't know. What episode is this? 25?
I think we're looking around at about episode 25 some years later.
Wow. Episode 25, and Jay Scott and I were talking about the Up Your Dialogue podcast. We're actually on our 5th year, I believe, 2019. If you want to go and take a look at our podcast on Apple Podcast or on the website or wherever you find us, upyourdialogue.com, wherever you might find us. We have shorts now on TikTok and all over the place. But our actual full episodes that used to be audio only go all the way back to 2019. So we've obviously not done a lot of podcasts. What does that average out to be? About 5 a year?
Sounds about right, but we are about ready to change all that and come back on a more regular basis.
Yeah, we're trying to kick this this thing off now in 2024 with some more content, and not only the long form content, but video content, as well as some shorter content that you'll probably see us out on TikTok and talking about on Twitter. And so all of our Up Your Dialogue accounts can be found on all these different platforms. And I think we're going to be a little bit trying, at least anyway, to be a little bit more dedicated to it, have these long form content podcasts coming out on a more regular basis, and be able to find us through the week with little snippets of Jay Scott saying really awful things that get us a lot of clicks. So
clickbait, that's the way of the future, right? You say something scandalous, and then everyone clicks on it. Yeah. What could go wrong?
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know about upyourdialogue.com, maybe this is the first time that you've found us or listened to us or see us. We have a podcast that is co-hosted. We have not just one host, but two hosts of the Up Your Dialogue podcast. Myself, I'm LA, and my friend Jay Scott, who I've been friends with for quite some time. A long time ago, back in 2019, we just decided that we would hit the record button on our conversations because we like our conversations, and we feel that maybe some of you would too. So we talk about all kinds of stuff, from politics to movies. We're going to probably be doing some Gen X 80s music stuff that we've talked about that we have in the hopper. So we've got, we don't just talk about politics and religion, although that's some of our best conversations, in my opinion, but we also do some other stuff because Jay Scott and I are such well-rounded, wonderful human beings. Basically.
That's right. And not only, I don't often do jokes on the show, but welcome everyone back to Up Your Dialogue. And you can either see us or you could check out our C.S. Lewis episode, right? How cool is that?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis episode. We've got episodes on Joaquin Phoenix and movies. We've got episodes on Reformation and Revolution. And I mean, there's 25 of them out there.
It's not clear that LA has understood my joke where you can either see us or you could see us Lewis. Right? That's how cool that was.
Sometimes it goes right over my head. But that was a good one. Good job on that.
Thanks.
Anyway, what we typically do is we just get on here and we talk about stuff that's going on. We get together and talk about things during the week, and whatever's piqued our interest in the moment, whether it's movies, music, politics, religion, theology. Jay Scott here is a self-proclaimed agnostic, who is a ditch and switcher, once a liberal, and I use that term loosely, now a Trump supporter.
It's a loose term.
Very loose term that meant something different many years ago than it does now. But that's Jay Scott. I myself am a conservative, have always been a conservative, a Christian conservative. And I have a lot of theology in my background. I'm an elder at the church that I attend. So some of our episodes go down the idea of religion, theology. But typically, whatever topic that we are talking about, we can approach it from different worldviews. And that's something I think that makes our podcast unique. A lot of times, podcasts are simply one sided, or everyone is a Trump supporter. Everyone is in like Christian circles, everyone is a Protestant or a Catholic, or everyone's coming from the specific viewpoint. Where here we discuss things, whether it's whatever the topic is, from different lenses, different worldviews, and we let each other talk. We're not shouting at each other. We're not stepping on each other. We're letting each other talk. That's why we call it Up Your Dialogue. And we make our points, and then we come to some sort of conclusion at the end, oftentimes. And the interesting thing is you can see how you can have a conversation. You don't have to agree with the other person and their worldview. You don't have to agree with their politics all the time. You don't have to agree even if you liked a movie or not, but you can still have a conversation with the person. You can still have a dialogue, come out on the other end with you learned something, he learned something, the audience learned something, and we didn't gouge each other's eyes out in the process. So that's kind of what our podcast is about. This time, Jay Scott and I have been talking about who the heck is going to be the president in 2024. It's an election year. Jay Scott and I are big political junkies. We love election years. I think some of our best conversations over the years. I mean, I'm not going to give away our age or anything, but Jay Scott and I are not young guys. I know from the video that you may have guessed that we're in our 20s or 30s, but we're not. And so
It's
we
the
have had
hair. It must be the hair.
we've had many conversations in political years, going way back. And this is a election year, as everybody is probably aware. But it's going to be a unique election year, I think, where your standard things are not going to take place, at least in my opinion. So we're going to talk about the presidency, the election cycle, and what we think is going to transpire and why we think it's going to turn out that way. And so it's going to be interesting to see where this conversation goes, given our backgrounds and our worldviews and our ideas on politics. And so it should be a great discussion. What do you think, Jay Scott?
I think we in the pre-discussion that we had about the episode before rolling the tape, LA called it President Who, the President Who episode. And I like that because one, it's not clear who's going to be the president, but two, some people, perhaps if they are elected as president, is it clear that they're going to know who they are or where they're at once elected? So, the first branch of the discussion we've had off camera is about the electability and the likely outcome of the candidacy of Donald Trump. Now, we're in the midst of primary elections on paper, and Trump has won them all so far, starting with Iowa and New Hampshire, and really hasn't had a lot of contenders that have stuck it out. DeSantis dropped out following his second place showing in Iowa. And Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out after New Hampshire, I think it was, or just before then.
And through
And
his
so
support to Trump, actually.
Chris Christie's out of the picture, although I haven't heard very much regret expressed in that regard. And so you really only have two possible contenders in the Republican Party as of today, Super Bowl Sunday. February 11th, 2024, when we're recording this, only two candidates remain on the Republican side. And of the two, the opponent of Trump, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, does not appear to be winning in any state
or relevant
really, not winning in any poll. And then there was the case of Nevada. I know LA was followed that a little bit. Nikki Haley, in the case of the election in Nevada that recently occurred, what does that mean for? We could keep Nikki Haley perhaps brief because President Who doesn't seem too likely to be President Nikki Haley. What happened in Nevada? What's the deal with Nikki Haley?
Yeah, what's the deal with Nikki Haley? What's the deal with the election cycle in the big picture? I mean, Jay Scott has kind of started out talking about this election cycle almost like it's normal. We had we had Iowa, we had New Hampshire, I believe Colorado is in the books. Um, and in a normal election year, you would say, okay, you've got a person running in the primary against a sitting president, and they're winning their primary. They're going to win, most likely, going to win the primary and going to be the person who's running for president for that party, in this case, the Republicans. In a normal year, you would say to yourself, everyone, no one has a chance but Trump at this point. He's way up in the polls. He's won the primaries and caucuses up to this point handily. In any normal cycle, you would say it's going to be Trump and Biden. So this wouldn't be President Who. This would be, is it going to be President Trump or President Biden? And that's what we would be talking about. But what makes this unique is that this isn't a typical election year, in my opinion, where you've got a, and for many different reasons. One of the reasons is Trump is former President Trump, who is running as a former president for his party's nomination. That's what makes this year unique, but kind of in a normal way unique. Um, what makes it even more unique is that you have someone like Nikki Haley, who we just talked about, who literally ran in the last caucus when the caucus wasn't even legitimate, like it wasn't even counted. The primary was the one that was going to be counted, and Trump was in the primary. Nikki Haley wasn't even in the primary; she was in the caucus, and you have this strange situation where this particular state was fragmented on how they were even going to run their primary. And so Nikki Haley runs against nobody in the caucus and loses against nobody, and she's still in the race. She didn't get out. Under any normal circumstances, someone who ran against nobody would immediately be getting out of this race. We already, as Jay Scott pointed out, we've already had people get out of the race. DeSantis, Vivek, they've already exited the race because there's no path to victory for them. Now, Nikki Haley is not getting out of this race because she still thinks, even though she's been destroyed in the polls and ran against nobody and lost, that there's still a path for her because we have this weird thing where Trump may not even be able to get his party's election or party's nomination, even if he wins the primaries and the caucuses, because he's been ruled as ineligible because he's an insurrectionist. And in my mind, the only reason Nikki Haley in this weird election year is not getting out of the race is because she thinks there's a possibility that Trump gets disqualified and then she by default gets the nomination as the candidate who is obviously neocon establishment lane. That's the lane she's in. In a normal election cycle, she would have no ability to even stay in the race.
When has that ever happened in Republican Party where a candidate has run and lost to nobody?
I mean, I can't think of any
There's
example.
no primary example where primary candidate Reagan or primary candidate Bush or primary candidate Romney or primary candidate McCain or primary candidate anybody lost to the sum total of nobody on a state election. And
No.
this is what happened to Nikki Haley. And I should add that not only did she lose to no persons named, but she lost by 30 points. Right? It wasn't a close. It was not a closely contested election between Nikki and nobody. It was a blowout.
Right.
And I've never seen that before. I'm unaware of an example of a major party whose candidate lost against nobody. That alone means something's wrong with your candidacy. Now, if that's not enough, then when she appears against Trump on ballots in states, she loses by 30 points here, somewhere like Iowa. She'll lose by 10 points plus in New Hampshire, where the independents get to vote in these primaries. Her home state of South Carolina is coming up in terms of primaries. So if she gets blown out in her home state, it seems like a charade. But the strength of Nikki Haley, the candidate, is only that if Trump becomes ineligible to run for office, as LA has said, for one reason or another. So part of the motivation behind this President Who idea is that on the conservative side, if we all wanted President Trump to win the primary and become the nominee, this still may not happen. And many people on the right, many people on the left, in the case of Biden and many independents, this isn't a never heard of view that something will prevent Donald Trump from becoming the next president. Now, historically, in American history, you do have an example of president separated by the term of an opponent, right? This is Grover Cleveland, Democrat in the 1880s, who won an election and then lost to Harrison, and then 4 years later came back and won a third contest. So we've seen some kind of historical precedent where somebody has won and then won. That's not impossible. But part of the theory of some of these folks who are, I would call skeptics of the process, believe that somehow Donald Trump, even though he may be the most popular candidate, or even though he may be the best funded candidate, or even though he may be the right candidate from various points of view, will not be allowed to return to the presidency of the United States. And I want to hear LA some notion of why that is and what could be the reasons or the methods of preventing Donald Trump from winning, even be it legitimately or otherwise.
Well, it's because we live in this polarized state of being where there's a fairly large portion of the country and certainly one entire party that believes that the person who was the former president, who is obviously the leader of the party and the presumptive nominee of the party to be in the election this year, is an insurrectionist. And they're challenging in the courts the ability for Trump to be qualified, because they're trying to get him disqualified under this idea that's as old as the Confederacy, in regards to being an insurrectionist against your country because of January 6th. And so this mantra of January 6th just continues.
Now, is this January 6th of 1865 during the Civil War? Is that what you...
No, this is January 6th of much more modern times.
So 2021, they did the 14th Amendment after the Civil War to prevent Confederate politicians and generals from
Confederacy legislation, right?
assuming office after the Civil War, and because of their participation in the Civil War on the rebellious side, having lost. But then they're going to take this notion that was applied after the 1860s to the Constitution 150 years ago,
That's
and
right.
then apply this to Donald Trump, who on January 6th was president and holding office while a crowd, a mob, a riot, some persons went to the Capitol and broke windows and paraded around on the grounds for a few hours.
Yes, you have a whole section of the country, possibly 45 to 50% of the country, and an entire political party that either believes or attempts to convince that the former president of the United States, is an insurrectionist based on Civil War legislation, an amendment that was created in that time period, and they're trying to get him disqualified based on this. And I saw
After 4 years, there was a 4-year war between the North and the South. 600,000 people died, a million or two wounded. Battles all up and down the East Coast and throughout the old Northwest and the Louisiana and everything else. After 4 years of bloodshed, they put in subsequent insurrection legislation, and they want to apply a 3-hour riot thing to the Civil War legislation, and half the country's on board with this.
Yes, and an entire political party. And I literally saw people crying after January 6th. There's video of it. Maybe we'll show it, of people talking about January 6th and crying because our democracy was being attacked. There are people in the Democratic Party, that political party, that are convinced that on January 6th, our entire form of government was under attack and could have possibly been overtaken. And then there's another entire party called the Republican Party, and 50% of the country, if not more, give or take, that believes that January 6th was nothing, was simply a protest that Trump had really nothing to really do with. It's not like he planned a coup or anything. He told people to peacefully protest, to go home at one point. And then you had some ruckus at the Capitol, and some people broke in. There was a guy with horns on his head, another guy that was sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk taking selfies. And some people are saying, look, this is totally overblown. It's ridiculous. You're using it for political motivation. There was no such thing as an insurrection. And in addition to that, you have this other thing that was going on that people may remember, called the BLM riots. And during that whole thing, you had people that were actually, coming against state capitals, setting things on fire, causing millions and millions, if not billions of dollars in destruction, and not just for 3 hours on one day, but day after day after day after day. And one political party and 50% of the country was saying it's mostly peaceful.
They showed it was mostly peaceful, while I think it was maybe Minneapolis was burning.
Was on
it was
fire.
on fire.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you had another political party and 50% of the country that was saying, wait a minute, people are burning cities down. They're attacking state governments. Why isn't this spoken out against? Why isn't this insurrection type activity. Why are we allowing this to happen? And so this is the problem we have right now and why we're going to have such a unique election year.
Donald Trump, there's a Colorado case to keep him off the ballot. And the Supreme Court of Colorado, I think without witnesses at a trial, declared him an insurrectionist. And this went to the Supreme Court that's hearing oral arguments to see if Donald Trump is eligible to be on a ballot or not. The vote hasn't taken place yet, but
no, but the arguments have been heard before the
readers of the tea leaves of the Supreme Court suppose that the Supreme Court is going to allow Donald Trump to be on the ballot in all 50 states, or in any case, deny this Colorado shenanigan effort. Presumably, we'll see when you can't prove what the Supreme Court's going to do, but when you listen to the justices, even the liberal justices, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, for example, they seemed like they were really having none of. Kagan was not on board, and nobody seemed to be really on board that a state could remove the guy. But this isn't the only one of Donald's problems. In other words, there are many factors standing between Donald Trump and the assumption of office next year in January of 2025. They attempt to make him ineligible on the ballot. We'll see if that works. The guy's facing 92 or something felony counts for various problems. LA brought up the documents problem as one of those branches, wherein the President Trump took documents back to his residence in Florida, and where they were held under guard for whatever reason, and the U.S. government is trying to get the documents back, and Trump's pushing back, saying, "Well, we'll see, and we'll get to it. I need to review them," or for whatever reason. I don't think he said go to hell, but it's something. Maybe that'll make the TikTok soundbite. Trump tells librarian to go to hell. I don't know if he said it like that, but that's kind of what he meant. Whereas the other guy has documents, and a different result occurs to him as a result of the investigation. So keeping Biden in abeyance for the moment, there's a double standard in the justice system where somebody has a document and he's to be felony prosecuted. Another guy has other document and he's let go. And they may keep Trump off the ballot. They may convict him of a variety of felonies and try and jail him, be it for the documents case or causing an insurrection. So there are a whole bunch of court activities surrounding Trump. But I would like to know if he survives these felony charges and wins his court cases, or whichever ones may occur before or tried before January of 2025. If he survives these different arrest charges, if he survives the eligibility to be on the ballots in the 50 states, which we presume he will, what other problems will prevent the Donald from assuming office in 2025? And here, I know I've heard from LA, and we'll ask him to explain and defend the notion that Trump will not become president in 2025 no matter what happens. In other words, it's not about the court cases necessarily. It's not about the eligibility to run for office necessarily. It's not about the view of the Democrats who think he committed an insurrection when Republicans consider this more or less riot number 543 of the 2020 riot season. What other things could happen if Donald Trump is duly elected? What will interrupt him from assuming office aside from court cases? What more is there?
Well, I think there are other things that will keep Trump from assuming office. One of them, in my opinion, is that the Supreme Court, as we've seen already in previous election cycles, is very hands-offish when it comes to overturning elections. They're also very hands-offish when it comes to getting involved in overruling states in regards to what the state electorate wants. And so, while I think you're probably right, where the Donald is probably not going to be disqualified by the Supreme Court, I also think that the Supreme Court is probably going to take a position of, look, you can't stop the Donald from running, but the rest of this is kind of out of our hands type of approach. So I think you can have one way is I think it's a very real possibility that Trump does get to be able to run if he doesn't get put in prison. I think he is able to run, but then you have this thing that we're very aware of that happens in politics where you have the people come forward and cast their votes, but it's not majority rule in this country either. So you have electors that go forward and say, okay, the people have spoken. This is our next president. I think it's a very real possibility that in a state like Colorado or Maine or some of these other states, that that just doesn't happen. That the electors say, look, the people have spoken, but this person is an insurrectionist, and I don't care what the Supreme Court says, we're not going to go forward and put this person's name in. I think
Right.
that could be one of the strange things. I think there's going to be strange things, unprecedented things that happen in this election cycle.
I'd like to hear about more of these. Some guy, Jay Scott from Colorado, says, I'm an elector and I'm not casting this ballot for insurrectionist Trump. I don't care who says what, I'm not doing it. Okay, there's one option. What other things could get in Trump's way? The courts, the eligibility, the electors.
The electors, and now you also have the possibility of these irregularities. Now, we all went through this in the COVID election cycle of 2020.
We went through that on the Up Your Dialogue podcast.
Went through that on this podcast. You can go listen to an audio of the whole COVID thing. And while I don't think that we can have another COVID thing that anyone's going to stay locked down for in this election cycle, you already are hearing. Jay Scott can tell me if he's been privy to some of this stuff or not, but I have already been hearing, not just in the rumor mill, but by representatives in committee about how we're worried that our electric grid could get shut down, or that China can hack our elections, or that, just insert catastrophic event A, B, C here. Whether it locks us down again, whether that route, or whether we just are going to say, you know what, here's some election results, but we also have evidence that China hacked the system, and it's not valid. The results aren't valid. Or, oops, the electric grid went down because China attacked our electric grid, or whoever attacked our electric grid, and I don't know what happened to those tallied votes that went on. We're going to have to recount these and then go through all the shenanigans. And
we'll look into it.
I just think that the irregularities, I don't want to say that the 2020 election was rigged, but I do want to say that there is a certain percentage of the vote that can be contested in various different ways. And then we can also have situations where catastrophic events are not necessarily actually true, but we can pretend they're true, and we can pretend that this is a problem for the election in whatever way that we want to cause.
So maybe this COVID-19 set a precedent in its way. All of a sudden, it's not a rigged election, but do you really trust the results? I think
Yeah,
half the
right.
Republican Party thinks it was rigged, to be honest. I
There's
know many
people that
people
think so,
who
for
they
sure.
think it was rigged for sure.
Yep.
I didn't see a bag of ballots, but it was damned irregular. And I don't know if the fact that I believe that it's irregular or LA does, if I think it's irregular, does that mean I've committed insurrection because I question the regularity of the nature of the results because everybody was on lockdown during COVID. And now you
Mail-in
get
ballots.
mail-in ballots in places where there didn't used to be.
Right. Now, I wonder if something. Now, I was on record on the Up Your Dialogue podcast as saying that Trump has to stop this election before it gets to the ballot box, or he's going to lose. And once that vote is cast and he loses, you are not going to get a court to overturn the election. So what he has to do is he has to stop this mail-in ballot nonsense, or he is going to lose this election. And what happened was Joe Biden got how many votes? Over 80 million votes, whatever it was. In any case, it was more than Barack Obama.
It was more than
Um,
anyone's ever
more
received in an
than
election ever.
more than any election ever. And what we can do, because Jay Scott and I are astute political junkies, is we can go back and say, this man, Joe Biden, has run for president several times, and this man is not popular. He's not a popular guy. Even if you like Joe Biden, he's not like a popular guy like Barack Obama was. He's just not going to be able to rally up that many votes for president. He never got more than like 2% of any vote in any presidential run. So even if you want to say that there was that the election wasn't rigged, you have to admit, even if you're a Democrat, even if you're as far left Democrat as you can get, that Joe Biden receiving that many votes, there was some sort of issue. There was some sort of anomaly or irregularity that went on in order for that man to get more votes than someone as popular as Barack Obama or Reagan in the 80s or whatever the case was.
Maybe Joe Biden developed this newfound sudden popularity because everybody found out and discovered that they really hated Donald Trump so much that they all came out, people who never voted before, and said, we've got to find whoever it is on the other side of the ballot and check that box.
Yeah, but that doesn't fly with me because it's just unprecedented. I mean, hatred does not drive the most votes ever in the history of mankind. It just it you have to be a popular person in order to drive that kind of popular. Now I know Trump was a hated guy, but we've had hated presidents before. We've had hated nominees before. It and I know maybe you might want to make the case that maybe Trump was the most hated person ever in the history of politics. I don't know if you could prove that, but I just don't buy the fact that hatred of a person drives that many votes for another person. I think, and when you factor in all the other things that were going on, you just have to be non-biased opinion would be that there was some irregularities going on with the mail-in balloting that caused that kind of a swing in voting for a person who just is not popular. Like Joe Biden is just not a popular guy. That's my point.
It was irregular. I don't understand how anyone could deny the fact that it was irregular. There
It's just
used to
yeah,
be
it's
there
bias.
used to be ways of doing elections. By and large, a person shows up at the polls and fills out a
Mhm.
ballot.
Yeah,
Some places have mail in, okay, or some groups of people have mail in. Um,
but it's very
but
small. It's very small though.
we had development and use of mail in ballots before 2020 in Arizona. And
Yeah, but it was very isolated. It was a small percentage of the
not
actual.
everyone did it, but it was like it was being tested or inserted or explored in some places in some ways. But then you have the pandemic and the whole nation shuts down in an unprecedented manner. And now you have an explosion of mail in ballots where the person didn't show up somewhere. It's a piece of paper that was mailed in somewhere and you're hoping by whoever it was that said that they mailed it. And so, in any case, whether you agree to the legitimacy of the votes cast or you question the results, it was unquestionably irregular in American history. Thing
It
like
just,
that never happened before.
yeah, just by definition of irregularity, it's
That's
irregular.
right.
The
And then all of a
election was
sudden,
irregular.
Joe Biden, who gets a popularity in his presidential campaigns of about 1% typically, suddenly gets the most votes ever
Ever.
in the entire history of the country. He's more
Another
popular than
irregular.
Reagan. He's more
It's
popular than
unprecedented.
Kennedy.
Right.
He's more popular than FDR. You name it, Joe Biden is more popular than anybody, anywhere. He's more popular than Abe Lincoln. He was, I guess, maybe they didn't have an election when George Washington became president in a popular sense. So maybe Joe Biden was more popular than George Washington, but we
It's
can't really
possible.
know.
It's certainly
Amazing.
possible. Yeah, it's certainly possible.
He was more popular than Donald Trump, also, who was,
Yep.
He had many admirers and voters. Doesn't matter.
No, and it's just not going to convince me, and nor should you try, really. If you're going to be unbiased and you're going to try and critically think about what we just talked about, you shouldn't be trying to put forward the fact that what happened in 2020 was clean as the driven snow, and Joe Biden legitimately got that many votes. It just doesn't add up. And
Folks
so
on the left and in the left media call this the most free and fair election in American history.
they're right.
They
Exactly.
repeat this phrase every
Yes.
day
And
on many channels.
just as many times, maybe as many times as they repeat in the word insurrection in regard to January 6th. So we have a problem that we've talked about on the Up Your Dialogue podcast of propagandizing of our sources of content, not being able to trust them because they're telling us things that are in front of our very eyes. When we see them and we think about them, they're telling us the protests are peaceful protests while the city is on fire behind the guy who's telling us.
Live. It was a live
Yeah.
coverage.
And they're telling us that January 6th was an insurrection when we have examples of insurrections in history, and this does not qualify as one. But they're telling us that it's one. And then you have people that are telling us that we had the fairest and freest possible elections possible in 2020
Ever.
when we can see that that wasn't the case with our own eyes. And so this is one of the problems that we have. And what's going to happen, I think, to get back to the point, is that because we have precedent of this and because so many people in the country will just take whatever someone tells them and just believe it, that we'll be able to say whatever it is that we want to say about this election. So we can't look at this. My point is, we can't look at this election cycle like it's just another normal election cycle, like we've seen in Bush Gore, like we've seen in Clinton Dole, like we've seen in H.W. Bush Clinton Perot, which I think in my lifetime before 2020 was probably the most unique up until 2020 because you had Perot, Clinton, and H.W. Bush, but they were still having, you had three people that were getting, I think Perot got almost 19% of the vote, even though he didn't actually win any electoral votes.
Biggest third party results.
Yeah, I had a huge third party result, which we've never
100 years.
experienced, up till then or after then. And so you had some unique things going on, but you still had normal debates. You still had election cycles that were, election results that were pretty much accepted. It wasn't, you could still turn on the news and say, okay, maybe I don't like what they're saying, but I still think that what they're saying is not a complete and utter lie. And now what you have is an environment where that's simply no longer the case. And so you have an election cycle, I think, that is going to be just, insert catastrophe here, try and get the former president on charges and put him in jail. Whatever it is that we have to do to stop this man from assuming the presidency, we're going to do it. And it's in some way, I might even be able to predict what the way is, but in some way they're going to be successful. In some
Yeah,
way, in my opinion, they're going to be successful in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different ways of stopping the man from assuming the presidency.
we've heard some of the possibilities from LA with the courts and the eligibility and the electors and the pandemics and the grid and that type of thing. Uh, it seems to me historically that people can receive votes even while they're in prison, and still have those be eligible. So there's Eugene Debs, the president of the Communist Party, after World War I, who was jailed for his left ultra left leaning ways, and received ballots in that election against Wilson, I think, and those were counted. He didn't win the election, but they didn't strike him down. So some people think even if Trump's in prison, he'll still presumably could be allowed to accumulate votes. And
I
so
think
then
that's
there's the
right, by the
case
way. I think
if
that's
he
right.
wins.
I think he can.
If he wins while in prison, does he have to govern from in prison? That's never happened before. So
Right.
if I was elected president while I was in prison, I know what my first order of business would be as president, and
What
that
would
would
that be?
be adios to this jail. First order of
Would you
business
pardon?
is
Would you pardon yourself?
you release J. Scott Hardin, executive order number 1.
Can a president? Can a president who's in jail and elected in jail pardon himself?
I
Can he
don't
do
know
that?
that a president's. I'm not sure if a president can pardon himself. Maybe not. But I think you could order a prison commandant to open the door and get out of the way. That might stick. That might stick.
Trump is on record of basically saying, "Look, in regards to these documents and in regards to things to do, if I'm the president, I can do what I want." So,
That's
can we
right.
keep an elected? Maybe he can't pardon himself. I don't know actually what the rules are on that, but can we keep a sitting president in jail? Like, can we keep him there? Can he let himself out? Can he just say, can he, instead of running the country from the Oval Office, can he run it from a jail cell and it doesn't really
Maybe he
matter?
does like the mafia boss thing, and you slip notes in
Or
and out of the.
do you put a bracelet on his ankle while he's in the Oval
You
Office and
could
he can't
monitor him in
leave?
case
Or
maybe he'll flee overseas when he goes to the EU conference or whatever the thing is. I've heard people claim that Donald Trump is a flight risk. I've heard that said before by the left. Um, and to get to the last point about this Donald, what could get in his way of assuming office? If he wins, he survives the court thing, the power grid doesn't go out, there's no disease or weird mail in shenanigan. Everything goes his way. Will they, and some people think maybe up to and including assassination? What about this, LA? If Donald Trump survives all these barriers, could he or would he possibly be assassinated in order to prevent him from holding office?
well, for those of our viewers who are Tucker Carlson fans, and we may talk about Tucker Carlson before this podcast is over because he's been in the spotlight. But Tucker Carlson is on record as saying an assassination is a possibility. And Tucker Carlson knows more than I do. And if this man is getting ready to assume the presidency because they literally couldn't put him in jail, or maybe he got elected while he was in jail, or maybe they did try some catastrophe and to have another irregularity or another irregular election, and Trump is up by so much that he even beats that out where he didn't last time, but he's up by so much that he even beats out the irregularities. And like Jay Scott says, everything goes his way somehow, and he is actually about ready to step up on the platform and take the position. you know Do we have another JFK moment? A lot of people believe that JFK was assassinated by the CIA or by whatever the case. We just
I think
had
it was aliens. I think it was aliens.
maybe who knows what? Maybe the aliens are watching over us and they take their uh, uh, marching orders by the CIA or whatever the case. Who knows?
They
But
take their politics seriously, these aliens.
but all I know is that we just had a sit down between Tucker and Vladimir Putin, where basically it was acknowledged that the CIA is responsible for blowing up the pipeline,
Right, Nord
so
Stream.
Nord Stream pipeline. So I mean, is it out of the question that if Trump gets to a certain point where he is, which I don't think he's going to get to, but if he does get to a certain point where he is going to be the president of the United States, even aside from all the shenanigans and all of the irregularities and all of the court cases and all that stuff, and Trump is actually going to beat all of that and be put in as president, is it beyond the scope to think that the guy doesn't get put down? I don't think so.
Could be something in the water, could be a toxic dart, or for whatever reason he tripped, and so forth. And
We have our own grassy knoll in 2024.
now we can understand the relevance of the political campaign of Nikki Haley.
That's exactly right.
Trump's in jail. The courts don't like
Yep.
it. There's a power grid thing. He's assassinated, or for whatever reason, Donald Trump's out of the picture, and therefore there has to be an alternate candidate, whoever that
Right.
may be.
Yep.
And you can't technically nominate nobody for office. Apparently, they have to have a name, even if they lose to nobody.
Although you can lose to nobody,
you can lose to nobody,
but you
as
can't
long as you have a name.
You can't install nobody into office, though.
That's right. You can't just install nobody.
Whoever it was that beat Nikki Haley in Colorado, they can't become the president.
That's right. They're ineligible, presumably, and so then you could have President-elect or President Nikki Haley. Now this is the Trump side of the 2024 election, with these issues about questions surrounding voting and eligibility and court problems and assassinations and shenanigans. This is 77-year-old Donald Trump right now going through his path. There's an even older candidate on the other side that seems to have his own set of struggles so far as he can remember.
Right. And I think his name is Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, right? So President Biden, I think he's 81 or something like that. He's in his 80s now. And don't get me wrong, not all 80-year-olds I've ever met are all the same. Far from it. Some
are in very good shape, mentally and physically.
Some are in good shape. Some have a certain sharpness that may be surprising or awesome to behold, and others need to find their way to a nursing home. And this isn't a bad thing. It happens that humans.
A recent poll just yesterday said that 86% of Americans in total, Republican, Democrat, whatever the case, it wasn't even asked, 86% of Americans think that Joe Biden is too old to serve a second term.
Now, they might not think so if Joe Biden knew where he was at and what he was talking about at most occasions. Then maybe it's not just because he's old. Yeah, that's the question they're answering. But
it's because of what's been happening. Right.
He's problematic. His mental capacity is in question. And
my point is
to your point that you raised earlier,
right,
which is that Joe Biden had a problem with his documents and some facts or perspectives were uncovered in his case with his documents.
Yeah, and there was a pretty scathing report that came out that basically said that Joe Biden was guilty of this document issue of having documents he shouldn't have had in places they shouldn't have had them. But we're not going to really go and prosecute him because he's just too old and he can't really remember things. And so this led a lot of people on social media to say, and rightly so, well, if he's too old and he can't stand trial for the document situation, then how can he, really run for president?
It's the best question I've heard popularly is how can you
And
be
this
competent to serve as president but incompetent to stand trial? How
exactly.
can you be?
And this is not only being asked by right-wing fascists, it's being asked by, from what I've seen, Democrats, people that are voting Democrat, people that are on the left. Like this poll says, and this is getting to my point, 86% of Americans, right and left, think that this guy is too old, not like you said, not because he's just a number of the age, but because the guy most of the time, can't put a full sentence together.
That's right.
Now, why this podcast is titled President Who is because not only do I think, for all the reasons that we just talked about, that Trump is not going to make it to the finish line, I also don't think that Biden is going to make it to the finish line because look at what's been happening recently. You've got James Carville just today, and we all know who James Carville is. He's the Bill Clinton guy. He, is
He's not a young guy either.
not a young guy. He's older than us,
He's
and
definitely older than us.
a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. We know him. He's married to his wife is not the outspoken Republican Mary Matlin, I believe is her name. I might have that name wrong, but I think that's her name. They're the famous couple where he's the Democrat operative, she's the Republican operative. But I've never ever heard James Carville come out and against the presumptive nominee, and certainly not a former president, certainly never Bill Clinton, certainly never Barack Obama. I mean, he even says that the fact that the Super Bowl, which is taking place even as we speak,
Yeah, that's right.
that the president didn't come out and do the normal things that a president does at the Super Bowl shows that there's a lack of confidence even from the general public that Joe Biden can even speak um, in a big moment like a Super Bowl. The New York Times is coming out with articles that say Biden's age is a problem, that it matters. Recent articles from the New York Times. You've got the scathing report that's saying, yeah, Joe Biden's a nice old man and everything, and he probably didn't mean anything by it. So we're not going to prosecute him because he can't even remember like when his son died. And so all these things are leading up to, in my opinion, another very unique thing that's unprecedented. And we're going to see several unprecedented things happen in this election cycle, in my opinion, where I would say by the time we even get into the summer, we may not even make it to the summer. Joe Biden is going to be removed as the nominee of the Democrat Party because of his mental faculties not being up to the ability to keep the nomination. And they're going to put somebody in his place, and they're going to do it in time so that they can get someone else to that DNC.
Party.
What's the term for it when they
Win the primary and they become the nominee
when they actually put forward the nominee? There's a term
at the convention, right? The
at the
balloons come
convention.
down.
Right? By the time they get to the convention, they're going to have Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee for the
That's
Democrat
a pretty
Party.
wild contention. First we have LA on the record here tonight saying no matter what happens, Trump will not be elected or serve as the next president, rather. And now we have also LA saying no matter what happens, Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee either. Now, the front runners today are Biden and Trump. They're both
Right.
winning their primaries. They're both the titular heads of their party.
Right.
They're both well-known entities. They both served as president before, and yet neither man will be there either during their convention or for whatever reason, in any case, serving in office. That's not going to happen. Now, who comes out in support of Joe Biden who can't remember somehow the death when his son died? He can't remember where he got documents from. He can't remember on Super Tuesday which one was the wife and which the sister. He trips on stairwells, bicycles, and sandbags, and we have to watch this unfold. Who is defending Joe Biden? Well, it's not the person in the New York Times that came out with the editorial that he's got to go. It's not James Carville who said for the good of the party he's got to go. His defenders, including today in their statements, are people like Kamala Harris, who said she's been with Joe day in and day out at all these meetings, and he's basically sharp as a tack.
Right.
Former press secretary Jen Psaki does the Weir Weekend show, and she said she knows Joe Biden, and basically, nobody's perfect, but essentially Joe Biden sharp as a tack.
Yep.
You get somebody when you interview like Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden sharp as a tack. So there are defenders of Biden from within his administration or from within his circle that are saying, oh, well, you don't have to really remember when your son died, and you don't really have to remember what country you're in. You don't really have to remember what year it is. The main thing is that he's a nice guy and he's there for our country. And you do hear defenders of Joe Biden. Not everyone's on board with Joe's got to go. It's not a rap. It's not them all sitting down like 25th Amendment style and saying, here, we're going to help you to your nursing home.
Right.
There's division about this. So if Joe Biden is declared ineligible or removed from the ballot or doesn't make the convention, then the question is begged, who is, and we're back to President Who again, who is the Democratic nominee for this office? Is it Kamala Harris, who said that he's fine and she's the serving vice president right now? Is it Governor Newsom from California, who's obviously got plenty of money and airtime? Is it, if some people think really it's the Obamas running the show, so maybe it'll be Michelle Obama or some other person connected to former President Barack Obama in whatever way. President Who is on the table, even in the case of the Democratic side, according to LA, is not going to be Biden. So we're left with President Who on that side of the aisle also.
Right. And this leads me to my point of another way that the Donald does not get to the presidency. And here's the other way.
So far, he's been jailed, banished, stoned,
banished, assassinated.
What else could it be?
So here's the other way. The other way is that we get to, let's say, May or June of this year, and no matter everything that they've tried, whether it's the typical shenanigans at the polling places that they have planned, whether it's take the power grid down, whether it's put Trump in jail and the courts and all this stuff.
COVID
2024, whatever, all that stuff. They've gone through all that stuff, and they still think we might still actually lose to this guy because he's up 15 points, let's say in May. Say he's up 15 points, even though they've thrown everything possibly at him. And then maybe they say that China's attacking the grid and we have to shut that down for 3 days. And they do some crazy stuff and they turn the grid back on and they do their thing. And Trump's still up 15 points. I mean, and then they say, you know what? He's up so far that we can't even get irregularities this time to give Joe Biden, 90 million votes is still probably not even going to win. It's still not going to be enough. Then what they'll do is your Kamala Harris's and your Gavin Newsom's and all these people, Nancy Pelosi's, all these people that right now are saying, Joe Biden is such a good guy and he's sharp as a tack. Then they're going to be the New York Times and they're going to be the James Carvilles, and they're going to start coming out and saying, you know what, Nancy Pelosi does an interview. You know what? Actually, I sat down with Joe Biden the other day and we talked, and yeah, he couldn't even remember who I was. And then you're going to start to have this stuff turn. And then what's going to happen is they're going to say, you know what? Collectively, Joe Biden's a great guy. We think he'd be a great president. But he just, now it's come to our attention that he's just not going to be able to do it. Or you'll have something actually go down. Like they'll say that, look, we thought Joe Biden was sharp as a tack, but actually we just got word back from the doctor that the man has full onset dementia.
Just recently, last week, he developed it, and now he's for sure got it.
Or they didn't think or something else wrong with Joe Biden, or whatever the case is. But now we've got this in front of us, whether it's a doctor report or whatever the case is, and he can't do it. So then what they'll do is, and I think it's pretty obvious that they already have this kind of hanging out there. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've heard all kinds of stuff about Michelle Obama, about whatever the case is. That's all floating out there. It's all out there. I mean, I've even heard Megyn Kelly talking about the fact that Michelle Obama could potentially jump into this thing. So I don't think it's out of the ordinary or way out of this election cycle anyway, where that happens. And then I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know who president who is. I mean, I can't sit here. I have no crystal ball. But let's say it's Michelle Obama. Okay. Let's say they've got it set up and president who is Michelle Obama. Then they say, look, President Biden, we like him. We think he'd be a great president. But he's actually been disqualified because of whatever, dementia, whatever the case is.
Sadly.
And we are going to put someone in his place, and it's Michelle Obama. And Michelle Obama now can run, and they can, have someone who can get close enough to Trump where they can put the irregularity or wherever the thing is and beat him at the ballot box. So I think that's the other way that Trump is kept from the presidency, by insert president who in place of Biden.
Now, this would be easier to do before the votes are cast. So to your point, in the summer or in May or at some point in any case before election day.
They won't go past that, yeah.
If it's after election day, then that's a whole other problem.
No. They'll implement Plan B if we get to, and we may not, but if we get to May or potentially June, and like I said, they've done everything they can think of, and Trump is up 15 points or whatever, then that's when that plan gets implemented.
Suddenly they'll see the light. And your Michelle Obamas or your Gavin Newsom or some star of the left will present him or herself and say it's time for the good of
the nation, so that we don't have an insurrectionist get put into the office. Poor Biden is not able to do this, and for the good of the country, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do this, whether it's Michelle.
I mean, Obama, what happens really when a president is incapacitated? A sitting president. We've had some famous cases like Woodrow Wilson, or FDR, who had heart attacks or strokes or incapacitating events. Yep. And really, it was their wives who kind of, in the back room, kind of ran the show temporarily. Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Roosevelt, respectively. So maybe it's Jill Biden. Fitting in with that model, who behind the scenes says, well, we need to sit this guy here, so let's give him drugs and make sure he can sit there.
Yeah, but I don't know if that can happen because of the differences that we have now in regards to media, social media, and things like that they didn't have.
Photoshop, deep
back
fake.
In the time of Woodrow Wilson. They didn't have. The environment's different, where I don't think you could just say, you know what, we're still going to kind of do this thing, but we're going to have the wife run it in the background. I think there would just be too much attention on that. And although, potentially, they could do some fake stuff, some CGI stuff, and make it look like Biden is still there when someone's actually running the show. I think that could be something, but I don't think that they would do that necessarily, because I don't think that Biden would be able to win. So I don't think, as it stands now, that they could get Biden into office and pull the person in the background shenanigans, because I don't think that Biden can actually beat Trump in the election. If you just said, look, we have a level playing field, we're just putting Biden and Trump up again, and we're not going to have shenanigans. We're just going to let people go to the polls, and it's election day. It's not election month. We're just going to let people go to the polls and vote. I don't think that there's a chance that Biden beats Trump.
We had some predictions during the 2020 election cycle. I remember on this podcast, we had a prediction for who would win the Democratic primary during Democratic primary season. And as I recall, LA predicted that Joe Biden would be the winner of the Democratic nomination. And I predicted out of a large field that Kamala Harris would be the winner of the field. And it turned out, after votes were cast and campaigns were had, that Joe Biden was in fact the nominee, a direct win in prediction for LA. Although Kamala Harris also made the ticket, and up until January of 2025, if Biden doesn't make it for some reason or another, it's President Harris. And so I feel like we did pretty well when it came to predicting the Democratic nomination last cycle. This cycle, my natural instinct tells me that it's going to be Biden versus Trump. These are the leaders of their parties, and they're both well known.
So you think so you're on the record to say that this is just going to be more of a standard election cycle. It's Biden, it's Trump. The heads of the parties right now are going to make it to the finish line. It's just going to be a regular election with no shenanigans, and may the best man win.
I feel like the odds of that happening need to be measured against the odds that one of the two will encounter difficulties, some of which we discussed today, be it Trump with his problems or Biden with his problems. But it seems to me, if you go that third level and predict that both of the leaders of the parties will not be on the ticket, neither man.
But we have to know
Really,
the Up Your Dialogue audience has to know. We have to get Jay Scott on the record here. Are you saying that one of the two doesn't, or are you saying that they both get there? Because
it's quite a quandary.
I agree. I'm going out on a much farther limb here to say that they both don't make it.
That's amazing.
But are you saying that they both make it, or are you saying that only one or the other makes it?
Apparently, any attempt to hedge my bets and blur the issue is not going to stand on the Up Your Dialogue podcast. Right?
Not after I made such a bold prediction. Can I let you hedge like this on your
LA
side?
has gone out on a limb, and he said it's not going to be this guy, and also it's not going to be that guy. That's a double whammy, and in statistical models, that's a hell of a thing when you're out on such a limb. Not just 1 out of 10, but 1 out of 1,000 type deal. And LA's boldly gone there.
But my reasoning is that because this is in no way, shape, or form is going to be a normal election cycle. So, in my opinion, I would never give a prediction like this if I thought we were still back in, even the Bush Gore days with the hanging chads, or even the Clinton
dangling chads. LA is admitting that so old is he that he remembers hanging and dangling chads on the ballots.
I remember Florida. The Chads. Yes, I remember the Chads, and
it was Miami-Dade County, and they couldn't get their Chads right somehow.
Yes, I remember.
And I think it was.
I remember the election cycles that were strange, but this is not just going to be a strange election cycle, in my opinion. So the probabilities that I agree, the percentages, I'm way I'm way off on the probabilities and percentages to say what I'm saying. But the reason I'm saying it is because I don't think that by any stretch that this is just your normal regular election cycle that you are able to play those probabilities and percentages off of.
Well, I'll answer. But also, I need the audience to be aware that LA is also a little bit padding of his bets in the sense that he's saying that 80-year-old men might not make it, right? He's not talking about a 50-year-old. He's talking about a guy that's 82 with his set of problems and a guy that's 78 with his own set of problems. And so it's a little more reasonable to predict that somebody who's 82 or 86 when he leaves office, or at some point, people of that age could consider bowing out gracefully and being an advisor, some kind of Jimmy Carter type thing where you do charity work or you're on a committee or something like that. But if you're 80 or 82 or 85, at some point, if you don't let this go, then you're steering yourself into the trap of a Dianne Feinstein type scenario where you're voting for bills and you don't even know what was said or why, and you die in office because you should have left a while ago, no matter what party you're in. At a certain point, when you're 70 or 80 or 90, but at some range in there, you start, the body gives and the mind gives, and it's going to give something, and you're not going to be at your sharpest. So LA's betting that 80-year-olds might not do too well. If he said this about Vivek Ramaswamy, and it was him versus Gavin Newsom in California, and you get 30-year-old or 40-year-old type dudes going at it, then neither one of them's going to forget their name or probably die because they fell over or something like that. Whereas we can imagine we're more capable of imagining Trump and Biden having issues because of their age. Now, aside from that, it seems to me that the safest bet is that one of the two will encounter a problem before his presidency or nomination. Either Trump will get arrested so many times or for whatever reason, or Biden will forget his name and retire or for whatever reason. To me, that's probably could be the safer of the branches. I don't know if America's ready to let these 80-year-olds go, right? We are Gen Xers here, your hosts of Up Your Dialogue, and I'm ready to not to say anything against 80-year-olds, but there are times when it's time to step aside and a new generation comes to the fore to do leadership functions. And you don't want to be the guy that's there and can't remember his name or do the Dianne Feinstein thing there. You need to have the grace and the wisdom to allow a new generation to also run the show when it's their time. I don't think America's ready to draw a line on this because Trump is the most popular candidate on the conservative side by far, and Biden is the most popular candidate on the liberal side. And I haven't seen a third party really coming to prominence saying, to hell with this whole thing. We're going with no politic border policy party or whatever the thing is. I don't think America's ready for that. Therefore, I'm going to predict it's Biden versus Trump, winner take all. Both candidates make it until their election and standing foot in office. Not that they'll both stand put in the same time, but one of the two.
Well, and I do want to make sure everyone understands that I do have a possibility where Trump does make it all the way but loses. But the only possibility that I see for that is Biden being replaced. So
Right.
so my contention is not that neither man will make it to the election. My contention is that neither Trump nor Biden will be the president. And so that does,
On January 20th of 2025.
right. So that does leave room for Trump or Biden making it to the election, but losing. So, in other words, Trump could make it all the way. He could make it past all the stuff, make it past all the nonsense. But Biden steps down, and then
Right.
Trump is beaten by whoever president who is. So there is that possibility.
Maybe he'll lose to President No Name, just like Nikki Haley seems to do in her primaries. Maybe the No Name candidate, is the
Right,
Cinderella.
and in that case, the at the convention, the electors can go and put up whoever they want President who to be at
Right.
that point.
So maybe we need to ask our audience, who do you want who to be during the
Who is
next
who?
election?
Now we sound like Dr. Seuss or something like that.
Who's who?
All the who's down in Whoville want to vote for who's going to be president.
I guess so. I didn't know we were gonna. You never know with Up Your Dialogue where it will ultimately steer toward, but we have, gone in unexpected ways with the Who's of Whoville and Dr. Seuss. I can assure you this was not part of the notes for the show or the discussion.
No, certainly not. But it's going to be whatever you want to say about it. It's going to be an election cycle that's filled with unprecedented irregularities at a minimum, I think. And if anyone thinks, in my opinion, that this is just going to be the Trump and Biden show with no nonsense going on, I think that's pie in the sky thinking. There's just no way.
Free and fair election of 2024.
Free and fair election with Biden just beating Trump out in a normal election day event. I'm just not seeing it.
Could we go even further out on a limb and say not only will Biden win in that scenario and he's elected and will resume office at the time, but Trump will also generously and respectfully say, well, you did win this election, so I get it, and we want to cooperate with you moving forward, and we wish you the best.
If you want to say that is possible in any world, then I'm gonna give that to you, because
I
can't see it.
Studied Donald Trump
Could you
quite
imagine?
deeply over the years.
I can't imagine any possible world where you do actually get down to a Biden-Trump election on election day, and Biden beats Trump by 5 million votes because he gets over 90 million votes this time, and Trump just walks up to the podium and says, you know what? Biden won this thing fair and square, and I hope that he does a great job leading the country.
That's right. And we all of us Trump supporters will now become Biden supporters during this time.
Yeah,
and help him out.
I think we should all get behind President-elect Biden and just try and unite the country together under.
And maybe 3 cheers for Vice President Harris too.
Because she's going to be great, and
she's great.
we just really all need to get behind Biden and Harris in 2025 and forward, and unite the country together behind their leadership.
And we'll be able to see it with our own eyes, that we can see, like the moon, and then it'll be in our eyes, and then it'll be in your eyes, and then we'll all see it because we have eyes. I did my best to replicate a Kamala Harris speech on the fly, but that's what I came up with.
In fact, I'd go so far as to say that if that actually happened, and we had some world where Trump got up and said, look, we just all my supporters, we just all need to get behind Biden Harris and let's unite this thing and be one country underneath their leadership. If that actually happened, then I don't know. If I saw that with my eyes, I don't know if I could possibly believe it.
You might think that was a deep fake.
I might think there has to be something wrong with this.
Trump really had died and been assassinated 2 years prior, and we just had this kind of deep fake thing.
That's right.
And now he's all about supporting and national unity and
That's right.
And also maybe calling for the immediate implementation of an electric vehicle market and so forth. Open borders, open them all. Don't even put a guard.
Yeah,
That's rude.
yeah, and then Putin gives Crimea over and says, you know what, I really want to work with Biden and the world, and and
And I'm
all.
really sorry. I'm very
Yeah,
sorry about this
yeah,
too.
yeah, and then the Palestinians look at the Israelis and say, you know what, we want to end this conflict.
Yeah.
You can have, we'll recognize you as a valid state in the region, and all of the Arab Muslims get together and say, you know what, Israel is a valid nation here.
And the Torah is the way to go. This whole Book of Muhammad thing,
Yeah,
forget the Quran.
forget that. The Torah is what
That's the way.
we're all gonna move to that, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the only scenario where something like that might happen is if the planet is destroyed and some historian wants to make up a story about what happened.
It sounds like a
Or
good fiction novel.
it's a good sci-fi novel right
Right,
there.
right.
Unexpected. They all got along and didn't care about their beliefs and
That's right. Yeah.
just lived in harmony. This is a utopian sci-fi novel in the making, perhaps. Or maybe it's the afterlife, and so God has come down from the heavens and said, "We are going to
Possibly.
have peace today, all you and them and the Jew and the Muslim and all the rest of it. This is how it's working." And
That's possible. Yeah. The second
commanded, and that's it.
the second coming of Christ might be the only way that peace is restored in this way. That's right.
Maybe the Democrat, if there is a second coming of Christ, the Democrat and the Republican will shake hands and call it bygones
The lion lays down with the
and
lamb.
move forward.
The lion
Right.
lays down with the lamb. That's right. Yeah.
So one of those two scenarios, neither one of which seems likely so far as we know in 2024,
Yeah.
presumably.
And,
Although is Armageddon off the table in today's world? Is it?
and I'm the one here that's going out on a limb. I mean, really?
We've
Is
upped
that really?
LA's thing by a long margin and said, no problem, we can account for this in our prediction. No, but the prediction will stand on my end that it's Trump versus Biden, one man walking into the Oval Office in January 2025, one of the two.
And I suppose that
And that could be wrong.
and I suppose that you would say that in that scenario that it's Trump that wins.
Of the two, I wouldn't want our listeners to get the idea that I have a pro-Trump bias in my perspective. But I could imagine Joe Biden thinking that he won and then not remembering what country that was and then getting lost and there has to be a rescue and all this stuff. Firemen are called. Of the two, I'm going to say Donald Trump for president walking into office.
The duly elected former president becomes
Duly elected, no incredible shenanigans. I don't know that how the Democrats will respond on that day or during that process. If they'll just say, "Well, these things happen."
So that's a good question. Let's take it one step further then. So in your estimation, it's Trump and it's Biden, and Trump wins, and he is installed as president, and at that point, do the Democrats accept Trump as president?
It seems to me if they don't, then they may have possibly participated in an insurrection. Right?
Well,
You
I
can't
don't,
deny the result.
but they've done that before. I mean,
That's true. It was Stacey Abrams who denied the result of the governor election in Georgia.
yeah,
It
but
was
you also
Hillary
have
Clinton.
Hillary.
It
That's
was Hillary Clinton who
right.
said that this was
Yep.
a type of questionable, uncertain president because he didn't win
Yep.
the popular vote.
And you had Democrat representatives in Congress get up and say on the record that the the electors should not be accepted.
Oh, yes.
If I remember my history correct, you had
Oh, yes.
representatives get up and say this in the Congress. So you know, it
We've
does.
had election deniers in our
We've had
day, in our history.
and they had a D by their names. They had a D by
They
their names.
generally had a D by their names,
Right.
especially in the Civil War. They had a D by their names, for example, and they refused to recognize the legitimacy of the elected president.
That's
And
right.
there was an insurrection in that case. That's what an insurrection looks like.
That's what an actual insurrection looks like. And
It does.
and we have also examples outside of our country and what an actual insurrection looks like.
Right.
And so, I mean, what is if Trump gets elected after all of this and he actually is installed and there's nothing that the Democrats or anyone else was able to do about it and he actually wins as in your prediction, do the Democrats accept it?
I don't believe that they'll all accept it. Right? So let's take the case of the January 6th, 2021 alleged insurrection. Here's the case where we had our Twitter exchange with Ruben Gallego, a congressman from Arizona. Now he's running for Senate, a strong left leaning liberal and rising star in his party, who said on record on X, the platform previously known as Twitter, that January 6th was obviously an insurrection because, unlike these other riots that you're talking about, Jay Scott, this wasn't some corner gas station or some, problem of a passing crowd. In this case, it was an attack on a U.S. government building and people inside U.S. government building. Unlike these different 7-Elevens and gas stations from the 2020 riots, which don't even compare, Jay Scott, this was a prominent member of the Democratic Party on record in discussion saying no way in hell is Donald J. Trump going to get off without being accused and convicted duly of an insurrection. So how does a guy like that respond if Trump ends up winning? How do you take this was an insurrection and it's treasonous and you should be removed? And if you look at the Constitution, such a person, how did they get removed? Well, that this is treason. It could be up to and including execution, theoretically. How do you back down from that if you're one of these left type leaders and say, well, it actually wasn't so bad, or let's get along? Like, there are left leaning radicals in the party that I find will not accept the results of a free and fair election and will object to them. Now, maybe they just will do so in silence or take to their social media accounts, but I'm from Portland, and so I know better. I don't think Portlanders are going to let this go. I don't know if someone like Ruben Gallego is going to let this go. Maybe he will. I hope anyone should respect the results of a free and fair election. I respected the results of the election in 2020, even though I thought they were irregular. But I'm not sure if these party members, does Adam Schiff and Raskins and all these other people, do they just say, well, these things happen, we have to get along to work together?
I find it hard to believe. I find it hard to accept that this is what happens. In a case where you have these people saying on the record that this person is an insurrectionist, that he tried to overthrow the election results, and now we're just going to idly stand by and and put this person into office again. I just find it hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that they do that. I find it hard to believe that if you have electors that believe in this whole insurrection thing, that they just willingly walk down the aisle and cast their vote for an insurrectionist. I mean,
What did the Colorado people do? They had their Supreme Court assessed Donald Trump as an insurrectionist. So if you're the politician or the elector or the person in Colorado and your state Supreme Court says he's an insurrectionist, are you just going to be like, well, but that was then and this is now, so let's work together?
I just don't see a possible world where this
I
happens.
like this rosy colored glasses optimistic approach, and I'm going on record with it or some version of it because for me to imagine what could go wrong will go wrong, then this country is in deep trouble. And the talk of the two parties is civil war talk. And this
Yeah.
is a grave,
Yeah.
grave area to go down. And therefore, that's part of the reason why I say I refuse to believe that there could be Civil War number 2. And I'm sure there were people in 1850 and 1860 in the United States who said, I get the fact that the two sides are not getting along, they're threatening each other, violence could occur, but I'm going to believe in the American spirit that something like this will not go down
So
all that way.
is there a possibility, and this is a question that I honestly don't know the answer to. Is there a possibility? Can it happen where we get down to the election and a state like California or Colorado or Maine or something says, look, we're not voting. We're not sending the electors. We're not engaging in the process. We are standing aside
We
because
abstain.
we abstain from this because we, the state of California, believe that even though the courts are not going to get involved in this to the level of we would like them to, and they're going to let this man run, we, as the electors here in the state of California, believe that this man is an insurrectionist and we are not going to install him. Therefore, the only thing that we can do now is simply abstain from the vote. Now, I don't know if that can happen, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think I have heard some people on the left say that they would
I've heard
rather
some
die.
rumblings. Yes, I've
They
heard some
would say
rumblings.
they would rather die than see Donald Trump in office. Now, this is further than abstaining, which is at least saying I
Yeah.
want no part of this. If you go further and say I'd rather die than have this,
Yeah, but isn't this basically where we were in the 1800s? Isn't it basically kind of the same where you had states that basically said, I mean, that was a secession thing, but basically you had states that said, look, we are not buying into this federal idea. And yeah, you had the slave thing, and obviously that was a
no, don't tell
big,
Nikki Haley. Don't
yeah,
tell Nikki
yeah,
Haley that there
right,
was. Nikki
right,
Haley doesn't know.
right. But what the slavery issue was tied into was this idea that we here in the southern states, this is our economy. You can't take this away because you're going to kill our economy. You're going to kill our way of life. This is what we do, and we're not having it. So we're simply not going to be a part of this union. And Abraham Lincoln said, "Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are, and we're going to force you to." And boom, you have a civil war. Now, to me, I'm not saying that I'm not going on record to say there's going to be a civil war in 2024. But what I'm saying is, I think what I see is some grumblings of similar ideas in place where you could potentially, I think, have it where you have a state of California or Maine or whoever, it says, look, we're not going to participate in this democracy anymore, what we representative republic, because we just don't agree with the Supreme Court rulings or with the court rulings or with whatever the case that this man is eligible or should be eligible or should be able to attain the office of the presidency. So we're simply not going to engage in the process.
You could see this going the other way too, where the governor of a state like Texas says, "I don't want any part of this. You guys can't guard our national border. You guys have fishy elections. You
And
guys are trying to
this has
rewrite."
happened, right? So Jay Scott brings up another situation that's going on right now where the governor of Texas says, "Look, we've got a border issue. You're not going to step in and deal with this, so we're putting up a fence." And the federal government says, "No, you're not." And the governor of Texas says, "Oh, yes, we are."
Yeah. So
And
what do you now? How does that get solved?
I don't know. I don't know how that gets solved. I mean, what does at some point the federal government send troops down to tear the fence down? I mean,
If it's like the Civil War, if it's like 1861, federal government will send supplies to its base, its troops, its function,
mhm.
and the state government that's not having it will fire shots against the federal relief flotilla that's trying to get their goods to Fort Sumter. And they'll interrupt that and start shooting to stop that from happening, at which point the Civil War is declared. That's how that goes.
Hmm.
It goes when shots are fired at the federal government by
Well,
a state government.
that's the precedent that we have. But do we live
That
in
we
a
know that that's the case. Could it go the other way, where the what happens if the federal government is doing and the state is sending in supplies, troops, reliefs, or functions, and the federal government says, "Hey, we told you to stop guarding this border, and now we're going to shoot a few of you or fire some shots. In any case, get out." What do you think this is, Texas?
Yeah, but that's in the case of Texas, where you have an opposing government in the federal that's elected to the federal in the case of the Democrats. However,
Right?
if you have a sitting president who is of the same party as, say, Gavin Newsom in the state of California, if Gavin Newsom gets up and says, "Look, Donald Trump has been elected president," or Donald Trump is, or let's back it up. Let's say Trump makes it all the way to the actual election. And then it gets to the point
As
where,
predicted by J. Scott Harden thus
as
far.
predicted by Jay Scott, and Jay Scott's prediction comes true, and you have Trump and Biden, and they make it to the actual election, and we're on election night or month or whatever happens, and it starts to be shown that Trump is going to win. Then you have that time period between Trump is going to win and the actual installment of the president, where the
There's
electors
a
go,
window there.
there's the window. Now, during that window, Gavin Newsom gets up, just as an example, and says, "Look, the state of California is not going to recognize Donald J. Trump as the president of the United States." What is the federal government's response on that?
Yeah, we had a little bit of this too in the 1860s, wherein President Lincoln was duly elected. He won the electoral vote.
Right.
And the representatives of the South said, "We do not recognize the result of this vote.
Right.
Not my president."
Not my president.
And
So,
again, war ensued. So maybe the federal government could say, "Okay, he's not your president, so go ahead and break off and do your own thing." I, Joe Biden, say, "Well, California and these liberal states, there's a little window here, so I'm signing up on this. Do your thing. Let's
yeah.
have the blue United States."
I don't know, besides civil war and the precedent that we have, I don't know what ensues at that point. I don't have the answer. Is if you have the Biden administration, then obviously would be sympathetic to in the situation where Trump actually looks like he's going to win, and in that window of time you have the Democrat run states object, then you're obviously going to have a sympathetic federal government in that case. The
Right?
federal government, led by Joe Biden during this window, is going to be sympathetic to the Gavin Newsoms of the world. in this scenario, where Abraham Lincoln was not sympathetic to the Confederate cause, right? So you have a little bit of a difference there, and I don't know how that plays out.
So this is the case too. When Abe Lincoln was elected, there was a window between the election and the
I
assumption of
presume,
office.
yeah.
And the previous president was not part of Lincoln's party. He was on the other side. And that's Buchanan. And he said, basically advised, we should keep the Union together and respect the results of this election either way for the so we can allow America to continue.
Now,
So
so that's a good point. So now, what is what would you say? Would you say that in our environment today, that if that happened, that the Biden administration and the Senate-led Democrats would stand up and say, look, for the good of the union, California, you must accept the fact that Donald J. Trump is going to be put forward and the electors must go and present themselves.
and you too, Portland, even though you
You, Portland,
really
and
hate
you,
the
Maine,
tunnel.
the union is more important. We need to come together. I mean, do you think that we live in a world where that is a possibility?
a
I
statesman a statesman should function in that way.
a, sta-
That's
a
what they
statesman
should do.
should function in that way.
Yes.
Man, I'm on record as saying that Jay Scott has got some pie in the sky
A
glasses on.
statesman should
That
operate that
that
way.
we have statesmen in the Congress of the United States and then
In
serving.
theory, if you imagine someone like a George Washington or some august figure in American
I'll give
history,
you
they
the
would
theory.
say,
I'll give you the theory, but are you willing to say that you think that we live in a world where we have statesmen, where that theory
so if
can, where that
this all
theory
comes
could
down,
actually be implemented?
let's
'Cause
say that Biden is the president during this window still. He's
which he
still
yeah, which he would be.
functioning, or he
In
didn't die,
your
or
scenario, he would be.
he's still there
In your
during this
prediction.
window. Yeah, he's there during the window,
Right.
and some firebrand liberals here and there say we don't want part of we're not acknowledging this election. Then the question comes down to, will Joe Biden tell such people,
Get
be it the
up and tell.
hypothetical Gavin Newsom or the hypothetical leaders of the city of Portland, Oregon, or somewhere else, you guys, for the good of our nation, need to respect the result. Not that you agree with, that you like the guy that's in office, but you have to function or we're going to lose the unity of our country.
Right.
Could I see Joe Biden making a statement like that? And the answer is, if he's of the soundest mind of which he's capable, you're never going to get the sharpest attack thing out of the Jay Scott theory of Joe Biden. But if he's as sharp as he could be and as statesmanlike as he should be, then Joe Biden will advise the firebrands of the left to avoid a civil war by acknowledging the results of the election.
If
He's of sound mind, as sound as Joe can be, then the Joe Biden we've come to know over the last 50 years while he's been in office in one place or another, mostly Delaware. But that Joe Biden, the Joe Biden that I've seen over the last 50 years, is not the firebrand saying, everybody, let's get our weapons out. See, that's not Joe Biden. That could be somebody like more radical, that is more separatist, that hasn't been around in this country for 80 years, saying something like that. But Joe Biden, if he has a shred of decency in him, and here my contention is that he does, there must be a decent bone in his body that says, I would rather have a united America and legislatively fight another day versus I want two countries, winner take all, everybody dies. I don't think Joe Biden's that person.
regardless if Joe Biden is that person or not, do you think Joe Biden is the person who is actually making those decisions and calling those shots.
Now we get to the point where during this window, Joe Biden might not be calling the shots.
But
And
even
some
if he
people,
is, let's say Joe Biden is there and he's the bumbling, can't keep a sentence person that he is now, or worse, by the time we
right?
get to this point, which is what, almost a year away,
A year
uh,
in the life of somebody like that is 50
is
years to someone
yeah,
else.
right. So let's say he hasn't even, let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he hasn't even got worse, that he's the same as he is now then.
Right?
Um, so you do you think that it's possible to say that, well, I agree with you that I don't think Joe Biden is that guy either, but I also don't think that Joe Biden is necessarily making all of these decisions himself. So I think that those who are handling him would have to tell him what to say. And back to your previous comment, where I would have to believe that people that are on the record saying that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist and, you know, shouldn't be the president by virtue of that would have to go back on that and then say, oh, well, yeah, I still believe that he's an insurrectionist, but for the good of the country, I think the insurrectionist
I'm
should
going to
be the
let this
president.
go.
And so I find that hard to believe that even though Joe Biden isn't that guy, and I would agree, the Grandpa Joe that we know isn't necessarily that guy, although, you know, we do have evidence of him during the Bork trial, and we do have the Clarence Thomas thing, and he, you know, did do some unpopular things there, but
Never called for civil war, this guy.
never called for civil war. But I don't think necessarily that the Democrats will get up and call for civil war. I think, though, that they would be put in a pretty precarious position of telling the state of California and Gavin Newsom, for example, yeah, Gavin, we agree with you, but you have to stand down and install this guy as president for the good of the country. I
Who's
find
in
that,
charge? Who is in charge of the people on the left in this country? Well, let's hypothetical this. Not hypothetical this, but let's take a historical look at this. Which is to say, if the Obamas are in charge, say if they are, of how things are unfolding in the Democratic Party or in Washington, D.C., or in the deep state, or they're ones with their hands on their levers of power, it's Barack Obama and the Obamas, say if it is. We have had a historical occasion on record where Obama personally and professionally handed over the keys to government to Donald Trump. He
that's
didn't
correct.
say, oh, I don't know, or I can't do this, or I don't like you, or the stakes are too high, or whatever the thing is. He handed the key. He left a note in the drawer for the next president, the custom. He observed the ceremonies, and a transfer of power did occur. This happened in 2016 on record. To
Truth.
the other side, we have had an occasion where Donald Trump didn't show up for the inauguration ceremony, which isn't the first time that's happened historically. The other example is John Adams, a
Yep.
respected, notable president in our founding history.
Yep.
He wouldn't show up for the ceremony, but he didn't put barricades around the White House and bring in the tanks and start shooting the place up. He left office,
Yep.
as did Barack Obama. So, in our recent examples, we have a very powerful leader on the left in Barack Obama, respecting the result of an election to transfer power. And we have, even though many in the left don't want to admit this, but in 2020, we have an example of Donald Trump, a powerful leader on the Conservative Party, who did not start a civil war over this matter. He just left. He respected the result of the election, even though he said he wasn't going to be on record as to what he was going to do. But when the day came and dawn broke on January 21st, and the Bidens show up to the front door, Donald Trump is not in the building. He left. Now, if that could happen in 2016, and it can happen in 2020, then that leads me to imagine that it could happen in 2024 either way.
I'll give you all that. That's facts. However, in 2016 and at that point in 2020, Donald Trump was not an insurrectionist by these
He
people.
did not stand accused of insurrection.
He did not stand accused, and these
Or
people,
neither did anyone else, right?
and these people were not on record as accusing Donald Trump at the time of being an insurrectionist. At that point, he was just a guy. We don't like him. Orange man bad. We obviously don't think that he should be the president because we think that we should have retained office. But it wasn't to the point where people were on record as saying that this person threatened the very democracy and and is being brought up on charges for such. Nor did we have states at the time that were saying in their own legislatures that this man shouldn't be allowed to run for president.
Let's go
So
back.
we didn't
Let's go
have
back
that
to that.
situation.
There's a window between January 6th of 2021 and Trump leaving the White House and power behind. There's a little window there. And during that window, we know Trump didn't call forth to the army to start mowing down people and launching missiles to California or whatever the thing is to stop the liberals. That didn't happen. But what did happen was an impeachment, right? So Trump's been impeached twice, but the second impeachment was regarding the events of January 6th. An impeachment trial for insurrection occurred in the halls of Congress. Not the first impeachment about the Russia thing or whatever the deal was, but this impeachment about January 6th was rammed through the House of Representatives real quick. They had a January 6th committee. They had accusations were leveled. He was impeached, and the Senate did not remove him from office. Right? You have to have 60 senators to actually do 66 senators, 67 senators, 2/3 to do the removal from office. That
Right.
part of it.
Right.
And they didn't have the votes. It was one time they had 52 and 55 or some number, but they didn't have the votes they needed to remove him from office.
And they knew
so
they would. I mean, the impeachment is sort of a dog and pony show.
Well, now, bear with me on this. The firebrands in the House of Representatives, the Ruben Gallegos of the world, voted to impeach Donald Trump. The California representatives, such as Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, voted to impeach Donald Trump for insurrection. Mm-hmm. The Senate said will not remove him. And so you have this little window where the party leaders in California or elsewhere could have said, we don't care how you vote. This man is impeached and removed from office, and we don't care what you senators or anyone else say. We're not serving in a government where this treasonous executive, we do not recognize him as president, but they didn't. None of them went so far as to say, now true, the window was very small, but according to them, the risk was very great that the Donald was going to take over power and not leave office and start shooting people and all this other crap. And they didn't abstain from recognition or participation in the United States government. They functioned until Biden took office during that window. Why can they not do so again?
I'm not saying that they can't do so again. They obviously can. I mean, it's not outside. It's not outside of a possibility, or it's not outside of the realm of thinking that they couldn't do that, because they could. I mean, they could just say, look, despite our differences, Donald Trump won, and everything, we're just going to put him in as president, and we all need to get behind Donald Trump. They could possibly do that. The thing that I think makes it improbable, where there's a chance that in an unprecedented way they don't, is because of what's happened in Colorado, where you've had a state, not just a senator, not just a representative in a dog and pony show where they know that they're going to go on record and impeach the president, but they know that they don't have the votes to actually remove him.
Mm-hmm.
It's different to me to think that you had a state like Colorado and others that have said, look, we don't think that this person should be the president, to the point where they've run it through their legislature to say so. And then you've had potentially have a Supreme Court that attempts to say you're wrong. He can. That's different to me than a senator in a dog and pony show. So, in other words, you have sort of an unprecedented thing where it's not just an impeachment of a president, but you have a state that says, we don't think that this person should run for president because of insurrection or what have you. And then you
Right.
have an sort of an overruling of that potentially that says, oh no, he can. And so does that mean that the state of Colorado and Maine and potentially others just stands aside and says, look, the courts have said their thing, Donald Trump has won, and so we're just going to, for the good of the country, we're just going to do this. I think it's a little bit different than the impeachment scenario.
I wonder if these leaders of the left and even leaders of the right the other way, but we'll focus on the leaders of the left. I wonder if they really want a civil war where Americans all kill each other. It's kind of like the World War III idea where nuclear weapons were seen as a deterrent.
Do you think that in the 1800s, in 1860, let's say, do you think that the country as a whole really wanted a war where 600,000 people would die?
I don't think so,
I
and
don't
I
think
don't
so
think
either.
even the people who gave grand speeches at the beginning of that war didn't envision millions of death and
Yeah,
or casualties. They weren't thinking that. They were thinking it'll all be over by Christmas, or yeah, there'll be a skirmish,
yeah.
or yeah, we have to make our point so they get it. And
Mhm.
then I don't even think all Southerners by far agreed to cessation. When you go to the state legislatures of the different states, they didn't all vote 100-0 to secede from the nation. That was controversial in many places.
Right.
And some places the vote was damn close.
Yep.
Or in some places you get these northern south states like Virginia that didn't even declare at first, and they're like, oh hell, now what do we do, that kind of thing. Like it was messy and blurry, and I don't think anyone knew what they were getting into in 1860 when people started seceding and assumed that whatever they were thinking wasn't
Yep.
the march to Atlanta and stuff like that. No.
I agree.
So hopefully now that we've been through a long history in our country, the people who have studied history or have a little bit of perspective on how things could easily and catastrophically go wrong, hopefully those people are in charge of both parties. Are they? It's all too easy to point the finger at liberal California and say, F you, we don't like you anyway, beat it. And it'd be all too easy for a liberal in San Francisco to point the finger at Texas and say, we never liked you either, bigot, beat it. And now that you could easily see the two sides conflicting. In fact, it seems hard to keep them from not conflicting. Feels like.
Yep.
But what do religious people say? The better angels of our nature better kick in at some point. And that's the way it should be, is that we say, I really don't like the 10 things that you stand for, but we're going to get through this.
I find it hard to believe that the better angels and the statesmen and the politicians of old, with the best interests of the country at heart, exist in mass in today's political environment. I just don't think it's the same. And that's why I look at it from a different point of view, where I don't think you have the same political environment, the same cultural environment as you did in previous election cycles that we've been through, that we've seen. And it's hard for us to imagine that that's the case. But I think it's time where we have to imagine it, because I think that's where we are. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we still live in an environment where you've got Clinton, or I'm sorry, where you've got Bush and Gore and the hanging chads, and at the end of the day, everyone, Al Gore gets up and says, "I accept George W. Bush."
Yeah,
And
this is an event occurred, and here we are.
yeah, maybe to your point, statesmen still exist. The angels are here, and this all ends that
We
way.
hope so, right? Everyone would hope this. You would hope to be wrong about this, and that there really are the better angels of our
Well,
nature came out.
certainly I would hope that would be
We
the
wish you
case.
would be wrong about this.
I would be happy to be wrong. I would be happy if the J. Scott predictions come true. That would be great. I can't see it happening,
The
but
J. Scott
yeah,
predictions did not occur in the primary of 2020, right? J. Scott said Kamala Harris was going to be the nominee of the party. Well, that was incorrect.
right. That was incorrect, and I'm afraid you're incorrect about this. But
This is
I
much bigger, right? To me, this is much bigger than
this
the
is much
Kamala
bigger.
Harris problem.
This is much bigger, but I don't feel like if Trump loses that he is just going to stand up and say, let's get behind Biden Harris. I don't feel like it's even going to get to that. I don't think we live in normal times, and I don't think this election cycle is going to be a normal election cycle like previous ones. But I agree with you. I hope that I'm wrong.
I think you may be correct, and it's it's quite possible that you are correct about this, and it's quite possible that, like presumably the ostrich, I want to put my head in the sand and say, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. Whatever is coming out of the bushes, not happening. My head is in the sand right now, and that's all that's happening. The presumption is that, you wouldn't want to be the ostrich in that situation. When the thing is coming out of the woods to eat you, you can't imagine your way out of it. Or that won't necessarily, that's not where the rubber meets the road on a problem like that. So we hope that you're wrong and I'm right about this, because we hope
We do.
to
Both of us agree on
see
that.
a peaceful solution rather than unpeaceful ones.
Yep.
That being
Absolutely.
said, I think we both agree that it might not happen the way Jay Scott predicts.
Yeah, I think we're actually in agreement on both accounts. I think we agree that we are hopeful, to some extent, that your prediction um, comes true, and that mine doesn't. And we're hopeful that we still have a political construct that can be saved, that is going to behave in a way that it once did, um, that the precedents that have been set are going to be followed. I just don't see it as a year where that's the case, and yeah, but hopefully I'm wrong.
Our worst days in the as far as the history of America are concerned, our worst days must be during the Civil War, when we just could not get along in any form, shape, or method to even get through the day. That has to be the worst moment in American history, the worst window of time, where it's two sides and they're killing each other in large numbers. So we know We know that our worst days can happen. They have happened, which means they are imaginable. It's easy to imagine a civil war if you consider the fact that we have done this before. We've been down that road, so obviously it's possible. And so, if you look at the darkest days in American history, you could easily imagine that this 2024 scenario will go very badly. But
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that I'm, like I said before, I'm not saying that I'm predicting civil war.
some do.
Some do. I'm not saying that I'm predicting necessarily civil war, but I'm also saying that I don't know what the outcome would potentially be if one of these scenarios that I think is not only possible but probable in this environment happens. So my actual question is, if these things happen, is there a way for these things to happen and avoid a civil war scenario? Is there some kind of, outside of just, okay, let's all just get along and get behind the elected president,
Yeah,
whether it's
that's not
Trump
going to
or
happen.
Biden?
Not really.
Outside of that, is there some other unforeseen possibility other than an 1800 style civil war that could come out of this election cycle, that is acceptable,
We are
other than the just the peaceful transition of power?
we're talking about grave disagreements in large sections of the country, two sides that do not understand each other and perhaps don't want to. And we're looking at examples of civil war in American history. So it seems to me an apt time to break the news to our audience that the Super Bowl is over. And there
Yeah.
was apparently some contentious overtime. But that being said,
Yep.
the the
Kansas City.
Chiefs plus the Swifties are Super Bowl champions in
And here's
2024.
and here's the interesting thing about this, that's going to come out about this Super Bowl, is that, what was the spread on the game?
If they say Kansas City as a 2.5 is at 2.5, does that mean? And here's where I could be wrong. This shows you my lack of betting expertise. But to me, that would have meant that the Niners are favored by 2.5 points. And so if the Niners win by less than 3 points, up into including a Kansas City win, anything in that range, then you would have won the bet.
Now, if Kansas City, by virtue of that touchdown, covers the spread, beats the 49ers in overtime by throwing a touchdown pass with time running out in overtime, and covers the spread,
Well,
and we
that's
find
not a
out,
touchdown though.
what's
It's a
that?
field goal, right? The 3 point deal.
Well, it's a field goal, but here's how I'm figuring out now that the game went. So in overtime, San Francisco went down and kicked a field goal, and so they were up by 3.
Right.
So San Francisco is up by
Ah.
3. If the game ends, then and you bet on
No,
Kansas
I
City to
feel
cover
like
the
it
spread.
was tied at I think it was tied at 22-22.
Well, no, the way I'm seeing that the game went is that it was tied at the end of the game, so it went into overtime. San Francisco kicked the field goal to go up by 3, but the way the rules are, if you kick a field goal in overtime on your first possession, the other team gets a chance to tie or score a touchdown and beat you. That's the rules. So Kansas City got the ball down by 3 in overtime and went down the field, and with time running out in overtime, didn't kick a field goal to tie it, but scored a touchdown
Ah,
to win.
that's dirty. That's dirty.
And because it was overtime,
Uh,
it's no extra point. So they win by
so
3, right?
you've heard it. You've heard it officially on Up Your Dialogue. Do not bet against Taylor Swift. I'm telling you, listeners. I'm not saying she's right or wrong, but don't do it.
And there's, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a lot of people talking about the NFL in regards to the NFL being rigged. The NFL being conspiracy theories. Are they in the pockets of Vegas? Did they want Kansas City in the Super Bowl because Taylor Swift is going to be there and get more ratings? And so I guess my contention is that if I find out after Kansas City scores a touchdown and covers the spread in this game to win the Super Bowl, if Taylor Swift actually, Travis Kelce did while the confetti's raining down, Travis Kelce did propose to Taylor Swift.
Right.
And the ratings are the highest ratings in Super Bowl history. Now maybe they got a point. Maybe the NFL is rigged.
Then you're going to cause possible shenanigans right there.
Maybe the NFL is scripted, and maybe this was always supposed to happen.
I feel like I've heard that Taylor Swift is left-leaning, that she will prefer to endorse Biden over Trump.
She is endorsing Biden.
So maybe that's why.
As far as I know, Swift is on record as a Biden supporter.
Well, this offers a whole new calculus, because I said, don't ever bet against Musk, who leans Trump, and don't ever bet against Swift, who leans Biden. So now what? I don't know.
My whole point is, do we live in a scripted, rigged world or don't we? I mean, whether we're talking about sports, whether we're talking about politics, whatever the case is, our predictions and our outcomes in the world that we live in, are we given what we want to see? Are we told what we want to hear? Has it already been decided that Michelle Obama is going to be the president in 2025? I mean, was it already decided that the Kansas City Chiefs were going to cover the spread and win the Super Bowl, and Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift were going to get married and the ratings were going to be what they are and all that stuff? Are we living in a Truman world here? Are we just living in a scripted, designed world of the social media and internet where we are just told what they want us to see?
I feel like as a final response to that, I'll remind our listeners that this is not the first time we have heard a Calvinist talk about predestination. This is not our first rodeo. Predestination.
Well, there's that.
There you have it.
We do have to bring this all back to worldview now, don't we? I mean, really.
We have to. We must.
This is the Up Your Dialogue podcast by any
what a enjoyable thing. I'm glad the Super Bowl was happening in the backdrop so we could cover that last piece.
Yeah. You never know what you're going to get on Up Your Dialogue. We can go from politics to football to any other topic at the drop of a hat here. So
let's say I'm going to go out on a limb here and say congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs, even though I preferred the other team. So be it.
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs, only by virtue of the fact that the San Francisco 49ers beat the Detroit Lions to get to where they are, and I wasn't happy about that, so I'm not sad to see Patrick Mahomes get another Super Bowl ring and the 49ers fall short.
Revenge is a dish best served with Swift.
And congratulations to Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. May their marriage be a long one.
Yeah, good.
All right, everybody.
This